June 2026. Ascot Racecourse, Berkshire. The straight mile of turf is immaculate, mowed tight, green against the gray English morning sky, and by 11 o'clock the Royal Enclosure has filled with 60,000 people, arranged by ticket tier, morning coats pressed, hats precisely impossible. The carriage procession from Windsor Castle isn't the racing. It's, in many ways, the point. 5 open landaus moving down the course at a measured trot, horses matching stride, occupants visible from the stands and the rails in a way that a limousine or a private entrance would never permit. You can see who is in the carriages. You can count them. You can note, with the particular attention that 60,000 people in a grandstand apply to this specific moment every year, exactly who is present and who isn't. The tradition runs to 1825, when George IV established the route from Windsor Castle through Windsor Great Park to the course. 2 centuries of June mornings, 2 centuries of the monarchy making itself legible to the public, not through press releases, but through the managed spectacle of people in carriages, moving at a pace slow enough to be studied. The carriage procession communicates one thing with unusual clarity. Here are the people the institution has decided belong in the frame. King Charles and Queen Camilla in the lead carriage. Behind them, the working corps of the British monarchy in order of seniority. The broadcasters narrate each occupant as the procession rounds toward the grandstand. The cameras hold, the crowd watches. This year, for the first time in years, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie of York weren't in it. The announcement hadn't come from Buckingham Palace, which declined to comment entirely. It came in early March through the Daily Mail, under a headline that didn't attempt to soften the implications. Palace bans Beatrice and Eugenie from Ascot. Princesses blindsided after being told they can't attend royal events for the foreseeable future. InStyle confirmed the specific detail that made it concrete. Unlike years past, Beatrice and Eugenie won't join the carriage procession at Royal Ascot. MSN described it as a break from their usual presence at the high-profile event. People magazine ran the same story. So did the Daily Record, Yahoo, Cosmopolitan UK, and the Daily Express. By the time every outlet had weighed in, the facts were as confirmed as anything gets when Buckingham Palace maintains total silence. The exclusion extended further than one afternoon in June. The sisters weren't simply removed from the procession or the royal box. They had been told they couldn't attend royal events at all, and that this would remain the case for the foreseeable future. No defined endpoint, no conditions stated for reinstatement, no timeline attached to what foreseeable future meant, which, in institutional language, is generally the formulation you reach for when you want to avoid saying permanently, while leaving that outcome available. Sources close to Beatrice and Eugenie, speaking to multiple outlets, described them as completely blindsided. Beatrice, 37, reportedly took it hardest. Eugenie, 35, was equally silent. The Express confirmed that both sisters had retreated massively from public life in response. Neither issued a statement. AOL reported that people close to the pair genuinely didn't understand what they had done to deserve this. That last detail is worth sitting with, because it illuminates the gap at the heart of this story. Not the gap between what they did and what the palace decided to do about it. The gap between how the sisters understood their own choices and how those choices landed with the man who is building the next version of the British monarchy. The most telling signal of how deliberate this removal was didn't come in any official communication. It came in a separate directive, reported by GB News and attributed to unnamed insiders, that had been communicated to other members of the royal family. The royals had been told they couldn't appear in photographs alongside Beatrice and Eugenie for the rest of the year. Not for the duration of one event, not through one uncomfortable news cycle, the rest of the year. That instruction, operational, year-long, photo-specific, isn't a family responding in shock to a single crisis. It's the deliberate architecture of managed separation, the kind that gets communicated quietly from one center of authority outward to people who understand exactly what it means and what they are being asked to signal by complying. Buckingham Palace said nothing. Royal Ascot's representatives didn't respond to press enquiries. The outcome, the mechanism, and the timing all point in a consistent direction. Everyone's first assumption, and it's entirely reasonable because the circumstantial case is strong, is that this is about Prince Andrew. His arrest on February 19, 2026, on suspicion of misconduct in public office, allegedly for forwarding confidential trade documents to Jeffrey Epstein, took whatever remained of the York family's institutional standing and removed it with a finality that the preceding years of managed disgrace had been building toward. The charge of misconduct in public office, in English law, involves a public officer who willfully neglects their duty or abuses their position to such a degree that it constitutes a breach of the public's trust. Applied to Andrew, a man who had already been stripped of his HRH title, removed from all royal duties, and had his military honorary ranks withdrawn, the February arrest represented the criminal justice system formalizing what the institution had already decided years earlier. He was out. His association with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell had contaminated the York family name progressively and documentably over years. The BBC Newsnight interview in November 2019, in which Andrew attempted to explain his relationship with Epstein and largely made things considerably worse, had accelerated a process already underway. By the time one academic source characterized the royal family as having clearly decided Andrew will no longer be part of the official royal family, unlike Andrew will presumably be left to his own devices in the grounds of Windsor Castle, banished from family events. This wasn't analysis of a possible future. It was description of an ongoing present. Beatrice and Eugenie had been navigating that present for years. Multiple outlets confirmed their names had appeared in Epstein-related files. An email had reportedly surfaced in which Andrew discussed payments of £50,000 to each of his daughters, with the nature and origin of those arrangements an open question. Sky News Australia reported that royal biographer Andrew Loney was specifically calling for Beatrice and Eugenie to be questioned about their alleged knowledge of Andrew's dodgy dealings. Multiple major outlets, including People magazine and In Style, framed the March 2026 Ascot exclusion directly in terms of the sisters' parents' association with Epstein. Their coverage pointed to Andrew's February arrest as the proximate trigger. The optics argument has a clean logic. Andrew is arrested, the palace distances his daughters from royal ceremony, the optics are managed. The problem is the timeline. Andrew's arrest was February 19th. The Ascot exclusion was reported in early March. 3 weeks elapsed. If Andrew's arrest were the sole trigger, 3 weeks is coherent. The problem is that the decision-making behind the exclusion had been running considerably longer than 3 weeks. The roots reach back months into a private conversation that was proposed as an offer and declined as an imposition, and whose refusal, by the account of those closest to the story, is what made the March 2026 outcomes feel not like an emergency response, but like a conclusion. Royal biographer Andrew Lowney, whose work on the royal family includes documented research across multiple books, and whose Substack is treated as high credibility within royal press circles, published a pointed question. Had Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie refused a specific request from Prince William? The piece prompted the Royal Observer to report that Andrew Lowney considered scrutiny of the sisters' finances to remain unresolved. From there, the story moved through the tabloid press and into royal commentary networks on both sides of the Atlantic, amplifying as it went. The core claim, as Lowney's reporting characterized it, was this: Prince William had privately proposed, described by most sources with temporal language ranging from last autumn to last year relative to early 2026 coverage, that Beatrice and Eugenie submit their personal finances to an independent, ethical forensic accountant for review. The framing of the proposal, as presented in multiple outlets' coverage of Lowney's account, was constructive rather than adversarial. The audit was meant to clear the sisters, to produce documented confirmation that their personal finances weren't entangled with the associations that had contaminated their father. A clean bill of health, in the language of the coverage, something they could point to when questions about their financial lives surfaced, as they increasingly were. Royal commentator Kinsey Schofield discussed the story on Talk TV, and her words were captured by the Express. What I think is interesting, they say in November the York women turned down Prince William's suggestion to do an ethics check. The word say in her phrasing signals this as reported information rather than direct knowledge. Other sources have used vaguer temporal framing, last autumn, last year, without pinning November specifically. The month of November 2025 comes from Schofield's commentary and hasn't been independently confirmed in the available record. What multiple sources confirm, without meaningful variation, is the event itself. William proposed a financial review, and the sisters declined it. The Talk TV host was described in the Express headline as having been left speechless by the revelation. The Daily Mail, the outlet that broke the Ascot band story and has palace sources that have held up under scrutiny across decades of royal coverage, reported directly. Prince William is said to be urging his cousins to allow an ethics check on their finances. Wonderwall characterized the ethics check as Prince William's final straw with Beatrice and Eugenie. The Royal Observer ran the headline, York sisters reportedly refused Prince William's audit request. Meredith Constant, a royal commentator quoted in AOL and OK magazine coverage, offered the most skeptical available framing. The only thing that's new here is the appearance of accountability and the rumors that William asked his cousins to submit to a financial audit. Constant's characterization treats the audit story as rumor level rather than confirmed institutional fact. It's a legitimate caution. The amplification chain runs from Lowney's Substack through the Royal Observer and the Royalist to tabloid coverage and commentary. It does not originate from a named palace source or a court document. Lowney is a credentialed royal biographer, but the ethics check story is single-sourced to his reporting. What the audit was apparently meant to examine, though, is specific enough to carry weight regardless. Lowney's reporting identified 3 distinct areas of financial concern that the proposed audit was designed to address. The first involved money allegedly connected to the Selman Turk embezzlement case. Selman Turk is a named individual associated with a documented fraud matter, with questions raised in Lowney's account about whether funds connected to this case had been channeled through one of the sisters' bank accounts. The second area concerned finances routed through a company called Alphabet Capital, connected to a businessman named Adrian Gleave. The third centered on the sisters' documented participation in trade trips to the Middle East and the Far East, trips conducted at public expense, on which both Beatrice and Eugenie had, according to Lowney's account, represented and promoted their father's business interests abroad. Sky News Australia's reporting on Lowney's position, calling for the sisters to be questioned about their alleged knowledge of Andrew's dealings, reinforces the specific nature of this third concern. And then there was the email. One MSN-sourced report noted that correspondence had surfaced in which Andrew discussed payments of £50,000 to each of his daughters, with the arrangement of those payments requiring explanation. A specific amount, a specific source, a specific transaction type that carries questions about its origin and legitimacy. Selman Turk has a name. Alphabet Capital has a name. Adrian Gleave has a name. The Middle East trade trips were sufficiently public-facing to appear in documented coverage of Andrew's overseas business activities. The £50,000 figure isn't an estimate or a range, it's a number, per that reporting, discussed in a recoverable email. These are the specific items that Loney's account identifies as what the audit was designed to examine, and they haven't been disputed in print by anyone with direct knowledge of the matter. The sisters' stated position, as Lowney characterized it, was that they had done nothing wrong, and that, as private individuals with their own jobs and their own income, their money was their own business. Legally, that position is coherent. Beatrice and Eugenie aren't working royals. They receive no taxpayer funding for public duties because they have no official public duties. Beatrice works in the investment sector, among other ventures. Eugenie worked in the art world before moving into roles at a charitable foundation. Private individuals with jobs. The framing is accurate by the measure of their formal constitutional status. As a response to questions about the Selman Turk embezzlement case, Alphabet Capital, Adrian Gleave, and the £50,000 email, it reads differently. The difference between "our money is our own business" as a general principle and as a specific answer to those specific concerns is the difference between exercising a right and refusing to account for something. Applied to that particular set of questions, the sisters' position communicated something about who they believed they answered to and who they didn't. The aftermath of the refusal is what's documented. Andrew Lowney's account describes the proposal and the decline. The March 2026 ban is confirmed by multiple major outlets. The photo directive is confirmed via GB News. The Royalists' headline, "William wins battle to banish Beatrice and Eugenie," frames the outcome explicitly as a contest in which one side prevailed. That framing implies resistance, a battle in which both sides engaged, and a winner. The winner, per the Royalist sources, was William. To understand why the refusal hit with the force it apparently did, you have to understand what William is building and why the population of that project isn't a minor scheduling concern to him. Tom Sykes reported in the Daily Beast, source to unnamed friends of Prince William, that William is planning sweeping reforms the moment he becomes king. A bonfire of royal titles, executed through executive authority. The Daily Beast piece is confirmed and published at a publicly accessible URL. Celebici noted in its coverage of the piece that Sykes's sources were unnamed and characterized his framing as treating William as though he had already ascended, a legitimate criticism of the piece's confidence level. But the general direction of William's institutional vision has been independently corroborated through multiple angles that don't rely on the Sykes piece alone. Cosmopolitan UK quoted a royal expert saying, "William is calling more of the shots now in how the institution is managed." The Spectator engaged with the slimmed-down monarchy concept seriously in the context of the Ascot Exclusion, and the structural logic of every documented action William has taken regarding the York sisters is consistent with someone who has a specific, coherent picture of who will and won't feature in the monarchy he intends to run. The inner circle that picture describes is narrow by design. Charles and Camilla for the duration of his father's reign. Princess Anne as the institution's operational constant, the working royal who has maintained decades of public service without generating scandal. William and Catherine as the future gravitational center. George, Charlotte, and Louis as the generation beyond. A monarchy that is legible to the public in simple terms: small, credentialed, controllable. Stripped of the peripheral family members whose private lives, secondary business interests, and extended relationships create headlines that nobody inside the institution can manage. Beatrice and Eugenie were never inside that circle. They had been non-working royals for years before the 2026 crisis. More than a decade earlier, when Charles was still Prince of Wales and pursuing his own earlier version of the slimmed-down monarchy, the sisters lost their taxpayer-funded police protection. The royalist specifically flagged this as historical context. More than a decade ago, as part of Charles's drive for a slimmed-down monarchy, Beatrice and Eugenie lost their taxpayer-funded police protection. They were already marginalized by the institutional logic that William is now applying, with considerably more force. The current crisis isn't the beginning of their peripheral status, it's the formalization of it. The ethics check was, from this vantage point, William's conditional offer to manage that periphery in a controlled way. To give the sisters a documented, clean financial record that could withstand scrutiny, allowing them to occupy some manageable position at the family's edge, present enough for appearances, documented enough to deflect questions. A yes would have produced a paper trail pointing away from risk. The no produced a different paper trail entirely. A record of cousins who, when offered an off-ramp and asked to demonstrate basic accountability to the future king, chose instead to assert that their finances were their own business. In a monarchy whose fundamental operational logic is the management of public perception, our money is our own business isn't a neutral answer to the future king. It's the answer of people who don't believe they answer to him. The refusal didn't happen in isolation. It happened against a background that made the sisters' external relationships considerably more significant than they might otherwise have been. Princess Eugenie's relationship with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is one of the most extensively documented personal alliances in the modern royal family's recent history, and its origins predate almost everything else in this story. Eugenie knew Meghan Markle before Harry and Meghan became a couple. Their mutual connection was Misha Nonu, a fashion designer. It was through Nonu's social world that Eugenie and Meghan had an established relationship. Tatler confirmed this directly, reporting that Eugenie knew the future Duchess of Sussex through their mutual friend Nonu. When Harry and Meghan began dating in the summer of 2016, Eugenie was reportedly one of the first people in the royal family brought into the secret, ahead of most of the family, ahead of any public disclosure, ahead of the institutional machinery that would eventually spend enormous energy trying to manage the story that relationship became. Vanity Fair reported this specifically. When Harry and Meghan first started dating in the summer of 2016, Eugenie was reportedly one of the first royals to be let in on the secret. The significance of being first isn't only chronological. Being trusted with the beginning of a relationship of that magnitude before the principals have any idea how it will unfold or what complications it will generate is a measure of proximity that proximity alone doesn't explain. It reflects a level of trust, an assessment that the person you're telling will handle the information correctly, won't feed it to a family that might react badly, will be an ally rather than a complication. Eugenie was Harry's choice for that level of trust. That choice has a context and a history. Hello Magazine noted that Harry and Eugenie had been close from childhood, separated by only 6 years in age, occasionally seen out together before either of them had settled into domesticity. This wasn't a polite family acquaintance maintained by Christmas obligations. Vanity Fair described them as having been occasionally spotted partying together before they both settled down. The foundation of the relationship was genuinely close, genuinely personal, and genuinely predated the Sussex controversy by years. The friendship survived and deepened as Harry and Meghan's institutional relationship with the monarchy deteriorated. When the Sussexes relocated to North America in 2020, they didn't put Frogmore Cottage on the market or return it to the Crown Estate. They gave it to Eugenie and Jack Brooksbank. That is a specific, documented, concrete gesture. A cottage on the grounds of Windsor, offered to one specific cousin as a specific act of continued trust during a period when the Sussexes were negotiating a departure from the family that was anything but uncomplicated. Vanity Fair confirmed this arrangement directly. You don't give a house to someone you view as a peripheral contact or a diplomatic necessity. You give a house to someone on whose side you've decided you stand. By 2022, Eugenie was seen at a dinner with Harry and Meghan in Los Angeles. She and Jack Brooksbank spent time with the Sussexes during visits to Portugal. The pattern of contact, sustained, cross-continental, maintained across multiple years and multiple international locations, built a record of alliance that extended well past the warmth of a new relationship and into something that functioned as a genuine ongoing connection across the Sussex departure and everything that followed. What the current status of that alliance is, the reporting doesn't resolve cleanly. People magazine ran an exclusive in the 2025 to 2026 period under the headline, Prince Harry and Princess Eugenie didn't have falling out, with an unnamed source stating their closeness remains intact. The Mirror ran a piece whose conclusion was essentially the opposite, a source saying Eugenie's relationship with Harry has now soured. Woman and Home reported that both Beatrice and Eugenie had withdrawn from their friendship with Harry and Meghan over the preceding 18 months, and that the Sussexes were now relieved to keep their distance from the York family as the Epstein scandal escalated. Marie Claire added a further complication, reporting that Eugenie had formed an alliance with William over their shared environmental concerns, framing this as a notable shift in royal family dynamics, though this stands as a single-source claim that sits in direct tension with the broader exclusion narrative. Marie Claire separately characterized the Harry-Meghan rift as having been really stressful for both sisters, placing them not as committed partisans on one side, but as relatives caught in competing family loyalties without clean resolution. These sources are in genuine conflict. The ambiguity is real, and the most honest characterization of the current Sussex-York relationship is that it has very likely cooled from its peak without fully breaking. What that cooling doesn't erase is the history. William's calculus, and multiple sources frame this as specifically his perspective, isn't primarily about where the alliance stands on any given Tuesday in 2026. It's about the fact that the alliance was built at the foundation of the relationship most publicly committed to dismantling the institutional monarchy he is constructing. Eugenie was Harry's first choice for early confidence. She held the Frogmore keys. She maintained the relationship across the Sussex departure, across the Oprah interview, across the Netflix documentary, across every public act Harry and Meghan undertook that registered in the palace as a challenge to William's vision. A cousin with that history, regardless of the current temperature of her phone calls to Montecito, represents a structural exposure that doesn't evaporate because of a cooling-off period. Rob Shooter, who runs the Naughty But Nice Royal Commentary brand, posted a video titled, Prince William Freezes Out York Sisters, with social content carrying the caption, Insiders say calls were made as William flexes his muscle. The specific content of those calls, directions given, conversations had, relationships tested, hasn't been confirmed beyond those words from Shooter's published material. But the description of calls being made as the exclusion was enforced is consistent with the broader documented pattern. Decisions communicated through informal channels, alliances assessed, people informed of where they now stand. Whether Beatrice is equally embedded in the Sussex proximity concern is harder to answer from the available sourcing. The documented closeness to Harry and Meghan runs primarily through Eugenie. Beatrice appears less frequently in that specific context. Both sisters were nonetheless treated identically in the exclusion. The photo directive covered both. The Ascot ban covered both. The foreseeable future language covered both. William appears to view them as a unit. whether Beatrice's own choices made her equally liable on the Sussex alliance dimension, or whether she was included by familial association and shared reputational risk, the outcome made no distinction between them. The clearest complication in any narrative about William acting as the decisive, unilateral architect of the York Exclusion is the man who is still, formally, the king. Charles, by multiple accounts from separate outlets, has taken a meaningfully different approach to his nieces than his son's position prefers. The Daily Mail noted in its ethics check coverage that even as William pushed for greater financial accountability from the sisters, Charles was determined to protect his family. That characterization, protective, not punitive, appears across multiple Charles-adjacent reports and distinguishes his instinct from his son's position with some consistency. Reports emerged in 2026 of specific tension between Charles and William over whether Beatrice should be returned to some form of public duties. Geo.tv reported that Charles took steps to bring Beatrice back into public engagements, a decision that, per that report, blindsided William and deepened his distrust of Beatrice, rather than prompting him to reassess his position on the sisters. Yahoo ran a piece headlined, "Prince William strongly opposes King Charles over this decision." Closer Online reported William was furious at a demand from his father connected to the York question. Furious is tabloid emotional calibration attributed to unnamed sources, which places it at lower confidence, but the underlying conflict it describes appears across enough independent outlets to suggest factual grounding. The specific patronage Charles reportedly offered Beatrice hasn't been named in available reporting. The source chain for the Charles-William conflict runs through unnamed insiders, as nearly all of this story does, since Buckingham Palace maintained silence throughout. What the consistency of the framing suggests, William opposing a Charles decision, a battle being fought, the royalists declaring William won it, is a real internal disagreement rather than a narrative conjured from tabloid imagination. Outcomes in March 2026 tracked closer to William's preferred position than to Charles's demonstrated instinct. Ingrid Seward, a royal commentator quoted by Geo.tv, offered a notably different interpretation of the Ascot Exclusion, that by not inviting the sisters to the event, the royals had saved them from an uncomfortable public situation. This reframe, protective rather than punitive, is consistent with Charles's characterized instinct and offers an alternative reading of who made the decision and why. Whether it describes the actual intent behind the ban depends heavily on whether you believe the principal architect was Charles, managing a crisis protectively, or William, managing the composition of his future monarchy. One outlet ran a headline describing William as finally completely aligned with King Charles regarding Princess Eugenie and Beatrice's future, which conflicts directly with the strongly opposes framing from the same approximate period. The most accurate characterization, given genuinely contradictory source material, is that the Charles-William dynamic on the York question has been in flux. Charles inclined to protect, William inclined to exclude, and the practical outcome as documented in March 2026 tracking toward William's position, whatever the decision attribution actually was. What this dynamic suggests, regardless of how you resolve the specific attribution question, is something quietly significant. William is exerting a level of institutional authority that formally isn't his yet. Charles is the reigning monarch. The York sisters are being managed on a timeline that aligns with William's risk assessment, William's vision, and William's apparent preferences. Cosmopolitan's unnamed royal expert described him as calling more of the shots now in how the institution is run. That description, even with its sourcing limitations, captures something visible in the documented record. The outcomes look like his work. The Daily Mail, alongside its main news piece on the Ascot ban, published a second article that connected the exclusion to a different moment. The headline read, Palace Ascot ban on York sisters follows tense moment with Kate. The subheading referenced an awkward day, a specific tense moment between two princesses during a prior Royal Ascot carriage ride. The Daily Mail, which has maintained palace sources across decades of royal coverage, chose to publish these two articles in the same news cycle and frame them in direct editorial sequence. That pairing communicates an editorial judgment that a prior incident involving Kate and Beatrice at a previous carriage procession carried contextual weight for the current ban. The specific nature of that prior incident and when it occurred wasn't detailed in available source material. The broader claim that circulates in royal commentary, that the York sisters made Kate's early years in the family difficult, that the dynamic between women born royal and a woman who had not been was a source of tension, is characterful, it has narrative logic, and it has circulated widely enough that it is difficult to dismiss entirely as invention. What primary sourcing specifically confirms is one documented prior incident between Kate and Beatrice at one prior carriage ride, and one newspaper's editorial decision to place it as context for a ban. The structural symmetry holds regardless of the precise backstory. Catherine entered this family as the woman William chose, not born into it, but chosen into it, in a family where female cousins held titles by birth. Whatever the specific dynamics of those early years, the woman who arrived without a HRH title is now the Princess of Wales and will one day be queen consort of a monarch who decides who rides in the carriage. That isn't a small shift in the balance of things. The counter-arguments to the permanent closure thesis deserve direct treatment. OK Magazine and AOL ran a piece describing a startling U-turn in William's position on his cousins, framing his stance as evolving rather than fixed. Radar Online reported in an exclusive that William had privately drawn a firm line against removing Beatrice and Eugenie's HRH titles, suggesting that even within the exclusion, there are limits to how far he is willing to go. A floor exists below which this doesn't go. Meredith Constant's skeptical framing of the ethics check as rumors and the appearance of accountability is a legitimate caution about a story whose evidentiary chain runs through a royal biographer's Substack rather than a named palace source. The report of William and Charles being completely aligned on the sisters' future, if accurate, would make this a joint royal position rather than William's unilateral act against his father's wishes. These are real counterpoints. The specific month of November 2025 for the ethics check refusal can't be confirmed beyond Kinsey Schofield's Talk TV commentary. The attribution of the Ascot ban specifically and solely to William, made against Charles's explicit opposition, is contested. The palace said nothing, and the sourcing for William's direct authorship of the decision runs through unnamed insiders. The conflicting reports on the current status of the Sussex-York alliance mean that framing Eugenie as an ongoing active proxy for Harry and Meghan may overstate the current temperature of a relationship that has, by multiple accounts, cooled. What isn't contested across this entire record, the sisters aren't in the carriage. Other royals were told not to stand alongside them in photographs through the end of the year. The palace said nothing to correct that directive or contest its scope. The exclusion from royal events was described as indefinite, attached to no conditions for reversal. Andrew Lowney published a detailed account of a proposed financial audit and a specific refusal, naming specific financial concerns with named entities: Selman Turk, Alphabet Capital, Adrian Gleave. And that account hasn't been challenged in print by anyone with direct knowledge of the matter. Sources close to the sisters describe them as not understanding what they did wrong. That framing, reported by AOL, attributed to people close to Beatrice and Eugenie, is the most revealing detail in the entire story, because it clarifies the gap at the center of the rift. In the sisters' accounting, they maintained their dignity as private individuals. They declined a financial audit they had no legal obligation to accept. They kept their relationships. They stayed out of public controversy. By their measure, they conducted themselves correctly. In William's accounting, they were offered an off-ramp and refused it. They chose a private individuals with jobs framing over demonstrated accountability to the institution. They declined to produce documented confirmation that their financial lives were clean of the associations contaminating their father. And one of them had a documented history of closeness to the Sussex project, the project whose existence most directly challenged the version of the monarchy William is building. They said no to the audit. Andrew was then arrested. The door closed. These aren't the same accounting. They may never be. And that gap between what the sisters believed they owed and what William believes they refused to provide is where the freeze lives. This was never simply about Andrew. Andrew had been excised from the institution before his February 2026 arrest made everything considerably worse. His daughters were managing their own lives, maintaining their own businesses, making their own choices about who they answered to. They had their own paper trail, their own financial associations, their own relationships on both sides of the family divide. They were offered a way inside a controlled perimeter. They said their money was their own business. He decided they were right, and so was everything that followed. The foreseeable future has no end date attached to it. The carriage at Royal Ascot holds the people William has decided belong in the frame of the monarchy he is building. In June 2026, that frame didn't include Beatrice and Eugenie of York. According to people close to William, the decision isn't pending review. Subscribe for more stories like this.